Hello, in this video I'll be showing you how to make a pair of shorts. The aim of this video is for my Alamanda Textiles students to follow along the instructions and help them cut out all their fabric and sew all their pieces together. First of all, I'll be showing you how to lay out your pattern pieces and cut out all of your fabric. This image is from your instruction booklet and is a written explanation of the correct method we'll be using to lay out your pattern pieces. The first thing you'll need to do is fold your fabric in half so the two selvage edges are next to each other. Next up, we take the two pattern pieces for the shorts, which is the pattern front and back, and we lay them on the fabric as shown. Now you'll notice the line in the middle there with arrows on each end. That's called the grain line. This is really important that it is exactly parallel to the selvage edges of the fabric. You can see here how I am measuring the grain line at each end to the edge of the fabric. This can either be the selvage edge itself or the fold, which should also be exactly in line with the selvage edge. Notice how I've taken a lot of care to make sure this is straight. I'm then going along and pinning each corner and along the middle of all the pattern pieces. Once I've done one side of the shorts, I'm then moving on to the other part of the shorts. In this case, it's the back. Again, I'm measuring the grain line to the selvage edge of the back, and then I'm pinning that piece of pattern in place. Next up, I start cutting out the pattern. So I'm going along with scissors, taking care not to cut into the pattern as I cut along the edge. I'm using fabric scissors for this. Once I have finished cutting out my pattern pieces, I'm removing all the pins from the fabric and I am left with two pieces of the front and two pieces for the back. And this is because we have two legs. The rest of this video shows the sewing instructions, and we start by sewing the leg front to the leg back on both legs of the shorts. Again, we have this image from your instruction booklets, which is the instruction in written words for you to follow along. You can see in this image that we are sewing the out seam and the inseam from the shorts. This means the long seam that runs down the outside of your leg and the short seam that runs down the inside of your leg. You will notice on your front and your back pieces of fabric that one piece is quite a bit bigger than the other piece. This is what it's supposed to be like. The back of the shorts is larger than the front of the shorts. The first step that we do is separate the four pieces of fabric, and we put the back pieces right side up on the table. Then we take the front two pieces and we place them right side down, so we have right sides together. Now in this particular fabric there is no right and wrong side, but if you're working with a fabric that has a print or it's very obvious that the fabric has a right and wrong side, you need to ensure that you place it in the right way. The next thing we do is we pin the out seam together, and you'll notice as I'm going along with this that I am lining up the edges of the fabric perfectly even. Now that's really important for our seam allowance, so all our pieces of shorts fit together. I then move on to the inseam, and you can see that I've pushed the excess fabric from the back piece out of the way, and I'm forcing those two edges together before I start pinning them. Again, it is really important that you line up the edges of your fabric when you pin, and that you aren't put off by the back piece being larger than the front piece. Set that leg aside and move over and pin the other leg, making sure that you are making a left and a right leg and they are mirror images of each other. Next up, we start sewing those four seams together. I'm using a 1 centimeter seam allowance for this project, which means I'm using the line on the needle plate that says 10, which is 10 millimeters, otherwise known as 1 centimeter. You notice that I am sewing slowly and taking the pins out as I go, and ensuring that I'm staying straight by following that 10 line on the needle plate. So that was my first seam, and next up I'm going to sew the inner seam of that leg, which is the short seam, remembering to reverse stitch at the start and at the end of each seam to ensure you're locking your stitches in place and so your shorts don't fall apart later on. At the end here you can see me pressing that reverse button and just going back 2 or 3 stitches. I now repeat this for the other leg, which you can see me sewing in very fast motion. The second step of the shorts is to overlock the 4 seams that we have just sewn. Here are the written instructions from your booklet, and you can see that we're going to overlock down the same 4 seams that we have already sewn. When we overlock, remember that the blade will cut off a part of your fabric. It is important that you do cut off a small amount of fabric so that the overlocking stitch is correct and wraps around the edge of your seam to stop it fraying. Because of the blade, you do want to take your time with your overlocking. Don't go too fast. You want to make sure that you're not accidentally cutting off parts of the fabric that shouldn't be cut. You need to repeat this step with all 4 seams that you have just sewn. The next step of the shorts is pinning together the crutch. Now some people find this step quite complicated and confusing, but really if you read each step individually, it should be a bit more straightforward for you. The first thing you want to do is turn one leg right side out, it doesn't matter which leg, and put that leg inside the other leg, which is inside out. This ensures that the right sides of the fabric are facing each other, and when you sew the legs together, we'll have the right sides of the fabric on the outside of the shorts when you're finished. Now to see what that looks like, you can see me here putting one leg right way out and the other leg is still inside out from sewing and overlocking. I'm laying those out together. We have one seam that's right side out and one seam that is inside out. And next up, I'm going to put the right side out leg inside the inside out leg. The next step is pinning, sewing and overlocking the crutch. And again, here are the written instructions from your booklet that I'm about to explain with the video. After placing one leg inside the other, I'm going to line up the inseam, making sure that the seam is exactly lined up together. You want to take your time with this to make sure that those seams are lined up and put a pin in that inseam position holding the crutch together. You then need to continue pinning all the way up the front of the crutch to the waist and then up the back of the crutch to the back of the pants waist. Now you can see again that I am forcing the edges of the fabric to be exactly lined up together, just as I did with the inseam and the outseam from previous. Pin all the way around the crutch from the front to the back. Now you've got the crutch pinned together accurately, you're going to take away the flatbed attachment from the sewing machine. This is so we can sew around the curve easier. We're going to start sewing at the front of the shorts, lining up the edge of the fabric at the 10 line on the needle plate. This is because we are sewing at a 1 centimetre seam allowance. As I'm going along, I'm ensuring that my fabric stays straight on that line, and I'm taking the pins out as I go, sewing over the inseam of the crutch as I reach it. Continue to sew around the crutch until you reach the back of the waist and reverse stitch. Next up, we're going to overlock around the crutch. You need to be really careful when you do this. Again, because of that blade, we don't want to get any fabric caught up in that blade and you accidentally cut a hole into your shorts as you go around the curve. Okay, we're up to step 5 where we're going to sew the casing for the elastic of the waist to be thread through. Again, you can see the instructions from your booklet here too. Now's the time we can open up the shorts and turn them around the right way and have a look at how far you've come with your shorts so far. They are really starting to take shape. In all steps up until now, we have done pinning, then sewing and then overlocking, but this time the order has changed. We are first going to overlock all the way around the waist of the shorts before we pin and sew. The reason is because we're going to fold over the casing for the elastic to go through. If we pin and sewed that first and then overlocked, we would cut our fold off and we would have no tunnel for the elastic to go through. Go all the way around, sewing over the seams with the overlocker until you get to the other side. Now we've overlocked around the waist of the shorts, we are going to create the casing for the elastic. We do that by really carefully and accurately measuring that casing, and that casing needs to be a 3.5 centimetre fold. And you can see here that I am measuring that fold each time I put a pin in. That's really, really important, because if the casing is not the correct size for the elastic, it's going to get stuck and it's not going to be able to thread through the casing well for you at all. Once you have pinned your casing, it is time to sew. You can see on this image here that I've got 2 pins facing the opposite way. That is to indicate where the gap is for the elastic to be thread through, and I've got the pins facing the other way to remind me where to start and stop sewing around the casing, so I have a decent size gap for the elastic to be thread through. So with the flatbed attachment still off, I am putting the machine inside the waist of the shorts, and I start sewing from the start of that gap. And I'm sewing on the overlocked edge, being careful to take the pins out as I go. Now it's really important that you sew right on that overlocked edge, because you have measured this carefully to fit the elastic through. If you sew closer towards the fold, your casing size might be too narrow for the elastic to go all the way through and reach the other side. Continue to sew along the waist casing until you reach the pin that's facing in the other direction again, in which case you stop, reverse stitch to lock the threads, and finish sewing that casing. Congratulations, you're up to step 6, which is threading the elastic through the casing. And again, here are the written instructions that you can pause on to read if you wish to. You need to measure the right amount of elastic for your body size, and you do this by taking your waist measurement, or the measurement of the area of your body that your waist of your shorts will sit on. That might be lower down for some people. You're going to times that by 0.7, which is 70% of your waist measurement, and then you're going to add an extra 5 centimeters for sewing it together. Now the reason that we don't cut the elastic to your exact waist measurement is because we want the elastic to stretch around your waist a little bit and to be a little bit tight, otherwise your shorts might fall down. So an example of this is if your waist is 85 centimeters, you need to times that by 0.7, which gets you approximately 60 centimeters. Then we need to add 5 centimeters of extra measurement for the overlap where we sew the elastic together, which means we need to cut off a piece of elastic that's 65 centimeters in length. Once you have your piece of elastic cut, you need to find a large safety pin and pin the end of the folded piece of elastic over. And you're going to use this safety pin to help you push the elastic through the casing of your shorts. We start by pushing that through the gap, and I'm using the end of the pin and my thumb to push it through the casing, and my other hand to gather the fabric around that safety pin and pull it through. I'm sorry it goes out of shot a little bit there. You need to make sure that you secure the end of the elastic to the shorts so the end doesn't also go into the casing, because you want the 2 ends of the elastic to come outside of the shorts so you can sew them together. I use a pin to secure this in place. Continue to push the elastic around the casing until you reach the other end. You'll see that the shorts start to gather in, so if you're worried that your shorts were huge, this is when they start to take shape and start to look like a regular pair of shorts. Once you've got the end of the elastic through, you need to unpin both pieces of elastic and layer them over, so one goes over the top, taking care that the rest of the elastic doesn't have any twists in it. Pin those 2 ends together and we're off to the sewing machine. To sew the elastic together, we need to set the sewing machine to a zigzag stitch. This is stitch number 12 on our school machines, and we want a width of 3 and a length of 2.5. With the flatbed attachment still off, we're going to put the machine inside the elastic loop, put the presser foot down, and you're going to sew along in a square or a U along the edges of that elastic overlay. Keep sewing around using the pivot method of turning corners around the elastic, and keep sewing until you reach the end of the elastic overlay and do a reverse stitch to ensure you're locking your stitches in place. You can see that the zigzag stitch stretches with the elastic. Next up, you're going to bring the elastic back inside the casing and you're going to sew that gap shut. You need to ensure that you set the machine back onto a straight stitch when you sew that gap. With the flatbed attachment still off, you're going to put the machine inside the waist, put the presser foot down, and sew from one side of the gap to the other, remembering to reverse stitch at the start and the end of your sewing. And now your waist is complete. The last step is hemming the shorts. And here we have the instructions from your booklet that you can pause on and read at your leisure. Just like the waistband, we need to overlock around the bottom of the shorts before we pin and sew. We do that by lifting up the presser foot and putting it back down and going around the loop of the legs of the shorts. Continue to overlock around the entire loop, going over the seams, and then get back to where you started from and run off the edge of the overlocking to the side. Similar to the waist, you're going to measure your hems at 2 centimeters or 2.5 centimeters this time, depending on how short you want them. It's really important that, just like with the waist, that you do measure this so the short hems end up evenly. So you can see that I'm using my tape measure every time I pin the hem up, and I'm not pinning too much. I'm not going around putting a pin every 1 centimeter. I'm sort of putting a pin every 3, 4 or 5 centimeters, just enough to ensure that the fabric stays in place while you hem. You can see I'm turning that around and now hemming the back of the shorts. Continue to go around this until you go all the way around the hem of the shorts. You will also need to repeat this for the other leg hem. Again, with the flatbed attachment still off, you place the machine inside the leg of the shorts, put the presser foot down, and we are again sewing along the overlocked edge of the hem, not on the fold. If you sew on the fold of the hem, the short hem is just going to fall back down because of gravity, so we need to ensure that we are sewing along that overlocked edge so the hem stays in place properly. We also need to backstitch at the start and the end of our stitches, just like all other stitches. You will then need to repeat this for the other leg. When I start my hemming, I like to start on the inseam because that's where I will have my double stitches from the reverse, and that's a little bit more hidden inside the leg than it is on the outseam or anywhere else along the shorts hem. Continue all the way around till you get back to the inseam, reverse stitch and take it out. Take your time now to make sure you've cut off all the loose threads from your shorts while it's still inside out. You should be cutting this off as you go along with your sewing projects, but if you have missed a few, take time now to make sure that they are all removed. Turn your shorts the right way around and you can enjoy your results. Once you finish your pyjamas, you can present them on a mannequin for photographing. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I'd like to thank you for watching.